Home is a sense of belonging. In 1984, I moved halfway around the world from Buffalo, New York, where I grew up, to Kuwait, where I married the love of my life. Whenever I meet people for the first time, they're curious about my life and often tell me I should write a book. They want to know more about how I could be so happy living so far from all that was familiar to me. I tell them I'm happy and blessed to feel comfortable in both places. I feel I belong. I'm at home whether I'm in Buffalo, New York or Yarmouk, Kuwait. I have a loving family and friends in 2 different countries on opposite sides of the world. Since I've lived in Kuwait for more than half my life, you may ask, do I identify as American or Kuwaiti? That's a hard question to answer, but I will probably tell you that I have 1 foot in Kuwait and 1 foot in the United States. Let me explain. I believe that people who were born in one culture and lived for a long time in another will identify as bicultural. When I'm in America, for example, people will tell me they hear an accent when I speak English. And when I'm in Kuwait, people will tell me how fluent I am in Arabic, but they will almost always detect that it isn't my first language. This and other aspects of my identity have been developing over time, and it hasn't always been easy to accept that I'm different because my life experiences are different from someone who was born and raised in one country, knowing one language and a single culture. I'm a native English speaker and learned Spanish in school. But when I moved to Kuwait in late October 1984, I only knew 2 Arabic expressions for hello and how are you, marhaba and shlonkom. But I had a genuine desire to learn the language and culture of my adopted home. I wasn't sure how or when it was going to happen, but I couldn't imagine not learning the language. There was only one place to study classical Arabic, to read and write, and there wasn't any institute that offered classes in spoken Arabic. So I registered for Kuwait University's Continuing Education Level 1 Standard Arabic and began to search for a way to learn the Kuwaiti dialect so I could communicate with my mother-in-law and other in-laws who had limited or no understanding of English. Some may assume that I should have been able to learn from my Kuwaiti husband. However, after speaking to each other in English for the first 7 years, this habit was almost impossible to break, even when we tried. The solution appeared during a visit to my sister-in-law's house. Although she didn't know English, her 4 grown daughters did. The youngest was still in high school, the oldest was a recent college graduate, and the 2 in between were attending Kuwait University. I was sharing my interest in learning spoken Kuwaiti, and after a short discussion, they agreed that if I helped them to improve their academic English, they would teach me Kuwaiti Arabic. I'd like to say the process was easy, but as anyone who's learned Arabic will tell you, it's so different from English. In addition, I was 29 years old at the time, which the research will tell you isn't the ideal age to learn a new language. But remember, I was determined. So lessons began. Each visit, my nieces taught me the Kuwaiti words for specific themes such as the kitchen or parts of the body. And then the next time I went and visited them, they would give me a quiz. If I passed the quiz, they taught me new words. If I didn't pass, I had to go back and study them again. They were tough teachers. After several months of study with my nieces and asking others about different words that I heard, I ventured out on my own. My philosophy about learning a language was to use it whenever and wherever I could. I recall one shopping trip to buy summer clothes. The salesman was from another Arab country and probably spoke English, but I decided to speak to him in Arabic about some white pants that had caught my eye and whether there were choices of colors in that style, to get some practice. This is how the conversation went. Marhaba, ahlan, في لون تاني؟ إي، في أزرق وبنفسجي. I thought. I know أزرق means blue, but I have no clue what benefsiji is. Couldn't remember that color. That's when I switched to English, thoroughly confusing the salesman, who looked at me and said, wait, you were just speaking in Arabic and now you're speaking in English. So I explained to him that I had recently moved from the United States and I was learning Arabic. And so I was practicing, but when he said the word for purple, I couldn't remember it. So learning the language was really important for me because it enabled me to learn about the culture and history of my adopted country and to be able to communicate with my older relatives and establish relationships with them. For the next few months, my husband and I had several invitations to visit his family and friends. In fact, the second week after we were married, one of my brothers-in-law and his wife invited us to their weekend chalet. It's like a summer home along the Arabian Gulf. It was a lovely day in late November and still warm enough to go swimming. My sister-in-law didn't speak English, so she asked a younger cousin of hers to translate. We walked up and down the beach. She asked many questions about me, wanted to know all about my experiences and so forth up until my move to Kuwait, and she offered a lot of advice. I appreciated how much she cared about me, even though she hardly knew me. I found out later that my husband was very special to her and my brother-in-law, so they wanted to make sure I was happy and comfortable in Kuwait. Their caring made me feel I belonged in the family. My husband and I were anxious to start a family as soon as possible, and we were blessed with our first baby, a son, in August 1985. There are several traditions that were still practiced in 1985 Kuwait, including 40 days rest and recovery, usually at the home of the baby's maternal grandmother. Since my mother was not in Kuwait at the time, I relied on my mother-in-law to advise me about taking care of the baby and how to recover from childbirth. At the time, we lived with my mother-in-law in an apartment on the second floor of her home. So there were traditions related to this 40-day period after the baby is born, including eating a mix of dried herbs that are taken with water, or in my case, mixed up in my food, since the herbs have a bitter aftertaste. This is a remedy for strengthening your back and insides after birth. Another tradition was eating foods such as a lamb stew with dumplings called gabut. This was and still is one of my favorite Kuwaiti dishes. My mother-in-law sent it up to my apartment every afternoon. That was until about the 10th day when a plate of spaghetti was served. I mentioned to my husband that I missed having the stew that day, but not to say anything to his mother. Of course, he didn't listen to me and went straight downstairs to let her know that I was surprised that she didn't serve the lamb stew. She told him she thought I might be missing American food. She told him she thought I might want something other than the gabut, which I was having every day. And he told her I loved gabut, and if I had it every day for the 40 days, it wouldn't bother me at all. So she laughed. Participating in those traditions made me feel closer to the culture and to my new home. I am blessed to feel I belong, not just where I grew up, but also in my adopted home. But not everyone has that experience. So I began to wonder what belonging was and what the science says about it. So belonging is very important. It's a human need. According to psychologist Abraham Maslow, it's ranked just above physiological needs like food, shelter, and the need to feel secure. So let's stop for a second and think about third culture kids, or TCKs, who spend their childhood outside of their parents' culture and follow their parents around the world and move every 3 or 4 years because of their jobs. Developing a new sense of belonging is much more challenging for TCKs because they experience multiple cultures throughout their young lives. Or let's think about refugees who are forced to flee their homes, move to a camp, or resettle somewhere very far from where they left. When refugees are resettled, they may experience culture shock, feeling like the other, or being unable to communicate in the local language. Ensuring they feel like they belong means the community must show acceptance and interest in their stories. In a recent study of Somali teenagers resettled in the United States, those teenagers who indicated a greater sense of belonging had lower rates of depression and higher self-efficacy, even if they had been exposed to adversity prior to resettlement. In Utah, an organization started My Story Matters to capture refugee and newcomer stories of students in local high schools. These students had few, if any, photographs of themselves with them and had never told their stories, their hopes and dreams before. Feelings of belonging were nurtured just by this project. So what are some ways we as educators can nurture that important sense of belonging within our classrooms for all students, including those who feel marginalized? Based on my own experience and recent research, I have a few suggestions. First, make sure you know each and every one of your students. Find out their likes and dislikes, their hopes and dreams, their strengths and areas they need to improve. Make it personal, not only academic. 2, ensure their culture and language is valued. In your classroom, if they are a newcomer or TCK, think of ways they can share their story. Make them feel valued. 3, allow for different ways of sharing their feelings, such as journaling or blogging. Flipgrid, Buncee, Wakelet, and other apps are great for this. I'm sure you know more than I do. Ensure that dialogue in the classroom is respectful of each student's needs and emotions. This is done by establishing a classroom culture of kindness and grace. This is the best way to form a classroom community. 5, literature is a wonderful way to introduce a variety of cultures, life experiences, and emotions. Students can reflect on what they've read and then relate it to their own experiences. Kuwait is in me, and I am in Kuwait. My experiences from the first day I arrived have instilled a sense of belonging. I embraced the culture and the people, and the culture and the people embraced me. We must do this for our students and ourselves. We should all feel like we belong.